Snow drifted over London like sifted sugar, softening the sharp edges of its grand facades while doing nothing to genify the edge of cruelty beneath its genteel society. Winter of 1814 had settled deep into the bones of the capital, and as carriages clattered up to the Ashcombe townhouse for the evening's gathering, it seemed to Eleanor Ashcombe that even the cold had claws. She stood at the top of the staircase, gloved hands folded to disguise their trembling, watching a ballroom of glittering figures swirl beneath crystal chandeliers. Lights scattered like shards of ice across polished floors, and the murmur of voices rose with the same restless energy as the storm gathering beyond the windows. She was to descend at her stepmother's command, smile upon command, and submit to a future arranged without a whisper of her consent. Lady Ashcombe's hand tightened at her back with a proprietary firmness. "Do try to compose yourself, Eleanor. You will greet the Merroways with proper gratitude. It is not every girl who is offered a duke." Eleanor managed a murmured, "Yes, stepmother," though the words rasped against her throat like sand. Gratitude. The word felt like a leash. She gazed down into the vast room where ladies moved like jeweled swans and gentlemen carried their titles like shields. Her own place among them had always felt uncertain, as though she stood upon the fragile brink of being overlooked or overruled. Tonight, however, she was not forgotten. She was bartered. As she descended the stairs, the whispers began, quiet, clipped, unmistakably deliberate. "The young baron's daughter is to wed the Duke of Merroway. A fortunate match for her." Fortunate? His wife has barely been gone 6 months. Perhaps the girl has a talent for comforting widowers. A ripple of stifled laughter followed. Eleanor's cheeks burned, though she kept her posture serene. Years of navigating her stepmother's household had taught her that composure was the only armor a woman of her standing could carry. The Duke of Merroway himself awaited her near the fireplace, a figure carved of mourning and expectation. His cravat was immaculate, his posture impeccable, but his eyes held the hollow despair of a man who desired companionship only as a shield against grief. He bowed with the courtesy of habit rather than eagerness. "Lady Eleanor, I am told you have been anticipating our acquaintance." A lie hung in the air between them, her stepmother's lie, crafted and polished. Eleanor forced a respectful smile. "I am honored, Your Grace." He studied her face as though assessing whether she could slip neatly into the empty space in his household. Not as a partner, but as a replacement portrait on the wall. Her stomach tightened with nausea. From across the room, Lady Ashcombe lifted her fan in a triumphant little motion. "Go on, Eleanor," she mouthed. "Charm him." And so Eleanor did what she must, offering polite conversation as if her throat were not closing around every sentence. She answered questions about her French lessons, about her late father's estate, about her abilities at the pianoforte. None of it mattered. He did not truly see her. He simply measured her suitability for a role she had no wish to fill. She felt herself shrinking, folding inward until she feared she might vanish entirely. The night stretched long, a tapestry of smiling masks and suffocating propriety. When she finally escaped into an unlit antechamber, the hush of the empty room closed around her with merciful quiet. The window fogged from her breath as she stared out at the swirling snow. White on black. Freedom beyond confinement. Her reflection in the glass looked pale, weary, and far younger than the expectations now crushing her. In the shadows, she noticed a small box upon a dressing table. It had belonged to her mother, the only item of the woman's that her stepmother had not swept into storage. Eleanor opened it with trembling hands and found inside the simple gold locket she had not seen since childhood. Her mother's miniature smiled back at her, gentle and luminous even through the years. Eleanor pressed the locket to her heart. "What would you have me do?" she whispered. She knew the answer before the echo died. Anything but this. But fate, or perhaps her stepmother's ambition, gave her no time for reflection. Lady Ashcombe swept into the room, her voice sharp enough to cut through Eleanor's fragile resolve. "There you are. His Grace is prepared to visit us for supper tomorrow. The contract will be drafted within the week. You will conduct yourself with gratitude." Eleanor felt her breath shallow. "Stepmother, I do not wish." "You do not wish?" Lady Ashcombe's laugh held no warmth. "You speak as though your wishes hold the slightest weight." The barony is weakened, your dowry modest, and your reputation only passable. You will marry the Duke of Merowe because it is the only path that ensures this family's respectability. Respectability. The word sounded like a verdict. I cannot, Eleanor whispered. I cannot become another man's consolation. Her stepmother's face hardened. You are a child if you believe marriage is about desire. It is about alliance, protection, and survival. You will do as you are told. She turned sharply. Your carriage to Merowe Hall will be arranged within 2 days. Pray you do not embarrass me further. The door closed with the soft finality of a cell. Eleanor sank to her knees, the locket clutched so tightly it pressed into her skin. She had always known she was not the heroine of her own tale. Her life had been shaped by others, her father's early death, her stepmother's calculations, society's expectations. Yet something fierce stirred in her now, a quiet flame fed by years of being spoken over, arranged, and controlled. She rose slowly, the decision forming with crystalline clarity. If she remained, she would be sealed into a life that extinguished every part of her that still hoped for tenderness, companionship, or meaning. She would become a shadow in another woman's home, living out someone else's story. But if she left, the consequences would be irrevocable. Scandal, disgrace, ruin. And yet ruin felt gentler than imprisonment. That night, when the last guests departed and the household lights dimmed, Eleanor slipped into her cloak, tucking her mother's locket safely beneath the fabric. Her heart thudded with terror and exhilaration. She moved through silent corridors like a ghost, down the back staircase, past the sleeping footmen, out into the stinging cold that slapped her awake with every breath. The servant's carriage, left harnessed due to the worsening weather, stood by the mews. Eleanor climbed inside, fumbling with the reins until the horses jolted forward. Snow swirled in blinding gusts, but she urged them on, knowing she had only a short window before her absence was discovered. She sought the open road, the wilderness of the moors, the uncertain horizon where no one dictated her fate. The storm thickened, swallowing the city behind her. Wind howled against the carriage walls, rattling like bones. Eleanor clutched the reins until her fingers numbed, whispering prayers into the whirling darkness. She did not know where she was going, only that she would go anywhere but Merowe Hall. Hours stretched. Snow piled upon the carriage roof. The horses slowed, struggling, and the wheels jerked into a deep drift. Eleanor cried out as the carriage lurched violently and then stuck fast. She tried to coax the animals forward, but the blizzard raged without mercy. She stepped into the snow, cold biting instantly through her boots. The moors stretched in all directions, white, endless, merciless. But ahead, faint and distant, glimmered a single warm light. A manor, perhaps. A chance of shelter. She staggered toward it, breath smoking in the air, cloak whipping behind her like a torn banner. The world narrowed to the glow in the distance, her pulse, her raw determination. Her legs buckled once, then twice, but she forced herself forward until her strength abandoned her entirely. She collapsed at the iron gates of Ravensshire estate, snow gathering over her like a shroud, the locket cold against her heart. And just before the darkness claimed her, she thought she saw a figure moving in the storm's veil, a tall shape, lantern in hand, striding toward her with urgency that felt like salvation. Snow muffled the world into a muted hush as Alexander Hawke, Duke of Ravensshire, strode through the storm, his lantern a trembling orb against the wind's relentless assault. He had ventured out only to ensure the outer gates had not frozen shut, yet fate placed a still figure at his feet, a young woman half buried in white, her face ghost-pale beneath the flakes melting on her skin. He knelt instantly, brushing snow from her cheeks, startled by the soft warmth of her breath struggling to continue. Her cloak was drenched, her hands ungloved, yet she clutched a small object close to her chest with a desperation that struck him as deeply personal. He lifted her carefully, aware she was little more than a fragile bundle of cold limbs and faint breaths, and carried her through the storm toward the lighted doors of Ravensshire Hall. The moment he stepped inside, heat and lamplight washed over them, and she gave the faintest sound, a sigh or perhaps a plea, before going limp in his arms. The household stirred quickly. Mrs. Alden, the long-serving housekeeper, fussed with blankets and hot bricks while Alexander laid the young woman upon a chaise near the drawing-room fire. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. Her clothing, though fine, was soaked, and her boots bore the slush of long travel. He spoke quietly, more to himself than to anyone present. "What in heaven's name were you doing out there alone?" No answer came, only the crackling of the fire and the faint whisper of wind pressing against the windows. Mrs. Alden urged him to let the maids undress the girl from her frozen garments, and Alexander stepped aside, pacing before the hearth with restless energy. The moors were treacherous in such weather. For a woman to travel alone suggested desperation, not folly. He could not shake the feeling that this stranger, whoever she was, had fled something more dangerous than the storm. When at last the maids withdrew, he approached again. The woman now lay beneath layers of quilts, a faint flush returning to her cheeks as warmth revived her. Her hair, loosened from its pins, glimmered like tarnished gold against the pillow. In her hand, still clenched even in unconsciousness, gleamed a delicate locket. Its clasp was worn with years of handling, as though it had been touched in moments of fear or longing. Alexander did not pry it open. He was not a man who inserted himself where he was not invited. Yet something about the way she protected it stirred an odd ache in him, a reminder of hopeless nights spent in foreign courts during his diplomatic years, when the weight of secrets felt heavier than any blade. Hours slipped by before the woman finally stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, uncertainly, revealing irises of deep, stormy blue. She startled at the unfamiliar ceiling, then at the warmth of the blankets, then at him. Alexander stepped back instinctively, not wanting to intimidate her with his presence. "You are safe," he said gently. "You collapsed outside my gates. My staff and I have done what we can." Her lips parted, but no words came at first. She seemed to fight between gratitude and fear. Finally, she whispered, "Where am I?" "Ravensshire Hall," he replied. "I am Alexander Hawke." Recognition flickered briefly across her features, though she masked it quickly, as though she feared revealing too much. "I thank you, Your Grace," she murmured. "I had not intended to impose." "Impose?" He allowed a small smile. "I assure you, rescuing you from the snow hardly counts as an inconvenience." She tried to rise, and immediately winced at the stiffness in her limbs. He offered his hand, but withdrew it when she hesitated to take it. That hesitation told him much. She was wary, cautious, trained by life to avoid placing trust too quickly. She asked for water rather than food, and he obliged her himself, noticing how carefully she avoided speaking of where she had come from or where she had intended to go. Her answers floated just above the truth, poised delicately like inverted glass. "My carriage overturned," she said. "I was traveling north. The weather overtook us." Alexander studied her closely. "Are you injured?" "Only tired," she said with a faint, brittle firmness. He sensed it was a practiced defense. By morning, the household hummed with speculation. Servants whispered in corners that she must be a runaway bride, a jilted lover, a woman fleeing debts or scandal. Alexander ignored such chatter, though he could not deny the mystery surrounding her. He had sent a groom to inspect the road, confirming her carriage lay half buried in snow, its driver nowhere in sight. Returning inside, he found her seated near the drawing-room window, wrapped in a shawl as pale morning light illuminated her features. She looked almost spectral against the frost-touched glass. When she noticed him, she stiffened slightly, as though bracing for interrogation. Instead, he offered her a pair of soft leather gloves. "My sister's," he said before she could refuse them. "She would have insisted I provide them." The young woman accepted them hesitantly, her fingertips brushing his palm for the briefest moment, a touch so fleeting and tentative that it left him unexpectedly aware of the boundaries they both observed. "What shall I call you?" he asked. A long silence followed. He sensed her debating how much of herself to reveal. At last she said, "Eleanor. Just Eleanor, for now. I would not trouble you with more." Her guardedness struck him again, this time with a pang of sympathy. Anyone who concealed even their surname was not simply cautious, they were endangered. Yet he asked no further questions. Whatever she fled, pressing her would only drive her deeper into fear. Snow continued to fall in relentless sheets that made travel impossible. Eleanor remained confined within Ravenshire's grand yet quiet rooms, and each day revealed another subtle hint of her inner conflict. She spoke little of her past but showed a graceful mind. Her observations keen, her courtesy flawless, though occasionally a tremor in her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Alexander found himself watching her more than he intended. The way she held a teacup with both hands for warmth, the way she paused before speaking, the way she startled whenever footsteps approached too quickly, as if expecting pursuit. On the third day, a rider appeared at the gates, a messenger wrapped in layers of wool and urgency. Alexander received him in his study. The man carried news of a missing young woman, believed to have fled a carriage en route to an arranged visit. No name was provided, only the description: a lady of refined bearing, traveling alone in reckless weather. Alexander dismissed the man with instructions to leave word in the nearby village if further information emerged. He returned to the hall with the rider's description echoing against every detail of Eleanor's face. She stood at the top of the staircase, her expression composed yet fragile, as though she had sensed that part of her story now hovered at the edge of discovery. Their eyes met across the expanse of the landing. She clutched the gloves he had given her, twisting them unconsciously between her fingers. Something in her gaze pleaded, not for protection, but for time. Understanding flickered between them like the quiet flare of a candle in a draught. Alexander said nothing of the messenger, nor did she ask. Yet the air between them shifted, charged with the weight of truths not yet spoken and choices that could not remain suspended forever. Still, he offered her a reassuring nod, a wordless promise that her secrets would not be torn from her. At least, not by him. She exhaled softly, her shoulders easing, though her eyes remained shadowed by uncertainty. The storm outside continued its ceaseless assault upon the windows, as if determined to keep the world at bay a little longer. And though neither said so aloud, they both sensed it. The moment of reckoning would come soon enough, carried on the next thaw or the next knock at the door. Snow pressed against the tall windows of Ravensshire Hall like a living creature, its pale breath blurring the glass as though determined to erase the world beyond. The storm had shown no mercy for nearly a week, imprisoning Eleanor within walls that were far kinder than the life she had fled, yet no less capable of stirring fear. The hallways, with their velvet runners and stately portraits, felt both sanctuary and purgatory. Each hour offered warmth and safety, yet each hour also carried her closer to the moment when the truth she guarded would no longer remain contained behind composed smiles and half-answers. And Alexander Hawke, with his quiet observations and perceptive questions, had begun to see through the veil she wore with such resolve. It was on the fifth morning that he found her in the library, seated at the great oaken table beneath a vast canopy of books. Pale winter light streamed across her face, outlining the strain that sleepless nights had etched around her eyes. She looked up quickly when she heard his footsteps, and for a moment, just a moment, her fear was unguarded. He paused at the threshold, struck by the fragile tension that hung between them like a thread stretched too thin. "I trust you slept better," he said, though he knew she had not. "A little," she answered. Her voice held the same poise she clung to every day, yet something in it trembled. She pushed aside a leather-bound atlas she had not truly been reading. "The storm has weakened. Soon the roads will be clear." "So it appears." Alexander took a slow step toward her. "That should bring you relief." "Yes," she said, though her expression contradicted the word. He sensed it again, that hesitation, that dread of what freedom from the storm might bring. She folded her hands in her lap, her fingers winding together with nervous precision. "Your Grace," she began, "I wish to thank you for offering me shelter without question." Alexander studied her carefully. "I sensed you had reasons for your silence. Reasons I would not easily understand unless you wished me to." Her breath caught, and he knew his words had struck directly at the fear she had worked so hard to conceal. He lowered his voice. "Eleanor, you are safe here. Whatever shadows follow you, they will not harm you under my roof." Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the weight of a decision finally reaching its edge. She rose from her chair, walking toward the hearth where the fire crackled softly, sending bursts of warm light against the carved stone. She warmed her hands, though they shook as she extended them. Alexander approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance behind her. She did not turn at first. Instead, She spoke with her back toward him, as if the flames could bear witness to truths her courage still struggled to carry. "I have taken too much from you," she whispered. "Your hospitality, your trust, and I have repaid it with half-truths." "You have repaid it with dignity," he answered softly, "and with conduct beyond reproach." "No," she said, shaking her head. "Not dignified, merely desperate." When she turned, her composure finally fractured. "You must know who I am. Or rather, who I am supposed to be." He watched her carefully, offering no interruption. Her breathing quickened, as though each word she forced out carved another chink from her resolve. "I am Lady Eleanor Ashcombe, daughter of Baron Ashcombe, though the title offers me little protection. My father passed 2 winters ago, leaving my future in the hands of my stepmother, whose ambitions have always exceeded her affection." The revelation was not unexpected, yet hearing it spoken carried a painful clarity. Alexander's eyes softened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "My stepmother arranged a marriage for me," she said. "A marriage I could not refuse without condemning myself to scandal or exile." She swallowed hard. "The Duke of Meroway sought a replacement for his late wife. My stepmother sought a title to salvage her waning influence. I was to be the answer to both." Alexander stiffened at the mention of Meroway. The man's grief had become a shadowed legend in London, and the hurried search for a bride had stirred its own whispers. "You were forced," Alexander said quietly. "I was cornered," she replied. "And being cornered leaves one with only 2 choices, submit or flee." She reached for the locket at her throat, pulling it free from beneath her bodice. Alexander had seen glimpses of it, but never held such a direct view. The miniature inside, her mother's portrait, gleamed with delicate wear, the face serene, the colors faintly faded. "This is all I have of her," Eleanor said. "And it is the only thing I took with me when I ran." "Ran," Alexander repeated, the word heavy with consequence. "I stole a carriage. I left without permission. And I did so on the eve of my betrothal announcement." Her voice broke. "I was never meant to reach Yorkshire. I was only meant to be gone." She looked up, her eyes meeting his with naked vulnerability. "If I am found, I will be forced back. And the disgrace will not fall solely on me. Those who sheltered me may also pay the price." Alexander absorbed every word with the solemn gravity of a man who understood both societal law and its cruelty. The conflict in her gaze revealed more than her confession. It revealed how heavily she believed she had burdened him. He stepped closer, his expression calm yet resolute. Eleanor listened carefully. His voice lowered, warming with a conviction that startled even him. "You did not burden me. You trusted me, if only by necessity at first. And that alone obliges me to protect your confidence, not betray it." Her lips parted in disbelief. "You do not understand," she whispered. "Men of the ton speak of reputation as though it were currency. I have none left. Anyone who defends me risks forfeiting their own." He gave a faint, ironic smile. "Then it is fortunate I have more reputation than I know what to do with." It startled a fragile laugh from her, small and unsteady, but real. The moment softened the air between them. Yet he sensed she had not spoken the deepest weight yet. "What else?" he asked gently. She closed her eyes as though bracing herself. "I fear what happens when the storm clears. I fear who will come for me. And worse," her voice thinned to a whisper, "I fear you will ask me to leave before they do." Silence fell, tense, brittle, pulsing. Alexander stepped forward until he stood directly before her. The fire carved warm lines across his features, and his voice dropped to a low, steady murmur. "Eleanor, look at me." She obeyed, though her breath trembled. "I shall never cast you out. Not now. Not after knowing what drove you into a blizzard rather than a marriage. Whatever comes, you will face it here, with my protection." The relief that washed across her face was almost painful in its purity. Yet before she could speak, a sudden gust extinguished 2 candles on the mantel, plunging the room into a deeper flicker of shadow. The abrupt darkness made her shiver, though not from cold. "What will become of me?" she breathed. His answer was immediate, fierce in its sincerity. "Whatever you choose." The words seemed to echo through the dim room, settling between them like a fragile vow. She stared at him, caught between fear and a dawning, impossible hope. Her voice quivered on a single, pivotal question. "You mean, you will not send me away?" Alexander held her gaze with unwavering steadiness. "No," he said. "Not even if the whole of England demands it." The fire crackled, the storm moaned against the walls, and for the first time since fleeing London, Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest, something that might one day become courage. Yet beyond the warmth of that moment, the world still waited, and the cost of her confession had only just begun to unfold. The thaw arrived like a long-delayed reckoning. Snow melted from the stone balustrades, dripping onto the gravel paths in soft rhythmic taps that echoed through the quiet courtyard of Ravensshire Hall. Eleanor watched the changing landscape from her chamber window, her hands clasped tightly before her as though holding herself together. Each patch of revealed earth marked the approach of the world she had tried to escape. The storm had sheltered her, but the skies now cleared ruthlessly, stripping away her excuse for remaining hidden. Alexander understood this as well. He stood beneath the budding yew trees that framed the courtyard, speaking with his steward in low tones Eleanor could not fully discern. Though distant, his posture radiated the same calm authority he had shown since the night he carried her through the snow. She found herself drawing strength simply from watching him. Yet strength did not soothe the fear that thrummed beneath her ribs. The moment of confrontation was no longer a distant threat. It hovered over her like a tightening noose. By midday, the inevitable occurred. A carriage bearing the Ashcombe crest, gilded and unmistakable, rolled through the gates, its wheels splashing through shallow pools left by melting snow. Eleanor felt her pulse stop, then surge. She descended the stairs because not descending would only worsen her shame, but each step felt like walking into a courtroom where sentence awaited. She reached the entrance hall just as Lady Ashcombe swept inside, draped in indignation and silk. The stepmother's gaze speared her with a mixture of fury and triumph. "There you are," she hissed. "You have humiliated me before all of London." Eleanor lifted her chin, though her voice emerged faintly. "I did not intend humiliation. I intended escape." "Escape." Lady Ashcombe's fan snapped open like a weapon. "You have behaved like a spoiled child, running off into the night as though you possessed any right to dictate your future. You were promised to the Duke of Marroway, an honor I worked tirelessly to secure." "It was not an honor," Eleanor whispered. "It was a sentence." Lady Ashcombe stepped closer, voice sharp as a blade. "You will return with me. You will apologize. And you will marry him. That is the price of salvaging even a shred of your reputation." Before Eleanor could speak, another voice entered the hall, a voice steady, unmistakably authoritative. "That decision," Alexander said, stepping forward from the adjoining corridor, "is not yours to command." Lady Ashcombe stiffened. "Your Grace," she said through clenched teeth, "this is a private family matter." Alexander's tone remained polite, but beneath that courtesy lay iron. "Lady Eleanor is under my protection. That makes her welfare very much my concern." Eleanor felt her breath stutter. She had expected his support, but she had not anticipated the quiet ferocity of his stance, nor the way he positioned himself just enough in front of her to shield her from her stepmother's glare. Lady Ashcombe's expression twisted into indignation. "You cannot possibly intend to involve yourself in this scandal. The girl has shamed her house. She has run from a noble marriage. Why risk your own name for someone who threw hers into the mud?" The question sliced the air. Eleanor lowered her head, bracing herself for Alexander's diplomatic withdrawal. It would be easy, natural, for him to distance himself. Protect his reputation. Preserve his standing. Yet when he spoke, his voice held a heat she had never heard before. "Because," he said, "no woman deserves to be traded as a commodity." The hall went still. Lady Ashcombe's shock quickly hardened into disdain. "Her sentimentality has clouded your judgment. You know nothing of this girl." "I know enough," Alexander replied. I know she crossed a storm rather than submit to a life she did not choose. I know that courage deserves respect, not punishment. Eleanor's eyes widened. Her heart ached with the force of unspoken gratitude. She met his gaze briefly, and in that fleeting connection, she felt steadied, anchored, in a way she had never known. Lady Ashcombe recovered with remarkable swiftness. Then I must appeal to your sense of propriety. The only path forward is to return her to London and restore the arrangement. No, Eleanor's voice rose before Alexander could answer. She stepped forward, trembling but resolute. I will not marry the Duke of Meroway. I will not stand as a reflection of a woman he still mourns. I will not sacrifice my life to fulfill your ambitions, stepmother. She drew breath, her voice gaining strength. You cannot command my future any more. A shocked silence followed her words. Even the servants lining the walls seemed to stop breathing. Lady Ashcombe's face flushed with outrage. You ungrateful child, she whispered. You think this rebellion grants you independence? You think the world will welcome you after such disgrace? At that moment Alexander moved closer to Eleanor, not touching her, but standing so distinctly at her side that the message was unmistakable. She will not face the world alone, he said. Lady Ashcombe scoffed. Do not tell me you mean to offer her sanctuary indefinitely. Your household will become the center of scandal. Alexander turned to Eleanor, and for a heartbeat, his world narrowed to hers. Eleanor, he said quietly, tell me only this, do you wish to leave Ravensshire? She stared at him, stunned by the simplicity and enormity of the question. No, she whispered. I do not wish to leave. The answer transformed his expression, some tension within him easing, something gentler settling in its place. He faced Lady Ashcombe once more. Then she will remain. And any who question her presence here may address their inquiries to me. The hall erupted with gasps. Lady Ashcombe's outrage reached a fevered pitch. This is beyond impropriety. This is madness. Unless you intend. Alexander did not allow her to finish. He turned fully toward Eleanor, his voice steady yet resonant enough to fill the hall. I do intend, he said. If you will accept me, not as a rescuer, but as the man who chooses you freely, I would be honored to stand as your husband. Eleanor felt the world tilt. Hope surged so sharply it almost hurt. She searched his face for hesitation, for obligation, for anything that hinted he acted from duty. Instead, she found conviction, quiet, sincere, unwavering. You would still risk your name, she whispered. For the chance to claim you with pride, he answered softly. I would risk far more. Tears blurred her vision. Not sorrow, release. She nodded, barely able to speak. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I will. Lady Ashcombe's gasp echoed like a new crack in old marble. She turned sharply, gathering her skirts with trembling fury. Then you are ruined, she spat. Both of you. Yet her retreat felt smaller than her arrival, diminished by the very defiance she sought to crush. When the doors shut behind her, the hall exhaled its tension. Eleanor turned to Alexander, overwhelmed. You have changed my life, she whispered. He offered a rare, warm smile. And you have changed mine. Their wedding took place weeks later, quiet yet luminous in its sincerity. Eleanor returned her mother's locket to her throat as she walked toward him, the sunlight through the chapel windows kissing its golden surface. Alexander reached for her hands with a reverence that made her heart flutter. When the vows were spoken, and she stepped from the chapel as the Duchess of Ravensshire, the world felt entirely remade. Ravensshire Hall welcomed her home, no longer a refuge, but the place where her life, at last, began by her own choosing.